Want to have a hot pelvic floor? Here are 15 things you need to know. I'm Candia Raquel, and you are at the Sensual Sessions Podcast, the place to explore sensing pleasure through your senses and moving in a way that it's free from inhibition and full of self expression. So, the pelvic floor is the intimate area between your legs where you have many things as the sphincters, the lovely genitals, and very importantly, a set of muscles called the pelvic floor. We also have the perineum, which is another set of muscles that works hand in hand with the pelvic floor. And today we are going to focus on the pelvic floor muscles. Just for context, they have a fan shape. They all connect to the coccyx, and they have that like center back, and then they radiate to the front of our pelvis up to the pubic bone, the pubic ramus, and the two sit bones. So these are three muscles. I'm gonna say the scientific names just for formality because this is an important area, so it's very important to be like very technical just to remove all that preconceptions and cultural noise about this area and just be very factual. So the three muscles are the pubococcygeus, because it connects from the pubic bone to the coccyx. Then we have the iliococcygeus, and finally the ischiococcygeus. Its name has to do with the ischium, which are the sits bones in Latin, up to the coccyx. So this fan shape literally works as a floor that we have between our legs, and it's a very intelligent floor because it's, imagine you're standing in a floor and that floor has to open and it also has to close. When does the pelvic floor opens? Well, it opens to give way for the sexy activities if you're on the receptive end. It also opens, of course, during childbirth to let the baby get out of the floor through out of your body through the floor of the body, and many times a day when we go to pee or drop some doo-doos at the bathroom. So that's the exit. And naturally it has to close because we don't want things come out when we don't want. Only when we go to the bathroom or on special occasions. So this makes it very challenging for the pelvic floor because it's a floor that has to support everything that is above it, like your intestines, the bladder, the uterus, or the or the liver, the kidneys, the prostate in the case of men. So these natural challenges makes it for an area that is susceptible to struggles like constipation, like urinary leaking, like numbness, or simply just not feeling much pleasure. And on top of everything that I have just mentioned, that is like the physical part of the pelvic floor, on top of those challenges, we have the cultural stigma and taboo around the pelvic floor and the shame and insecurities that surrounds it. So these 15 things you need to know for a hot pelvic floor aim to first off dismantle all those taboos in order to see the pelvic floor as just another area of your body, of yourself, the same as the armpit or the cheek or the nose or whatever, and an invitation to tend to your pelvic floor in a shameless, uninhibited way that is fully supported by scientific information on one hand, and on the other hand, sustained by your full permission for you, beginning with yourself. So, the first thing, these 15 things are divided first in the general approach. The second part is about common problems about the pelvic floor. And lastly, 5 tips to activate this body area. And at the very end, I'm gonna share with you a little bit more about pelvic floor awakening. That is my premium course to learn more about the beautiful, beautiful, beautiful pelvic floor. So, first thing you need to know about the pelvic floor is that anything that you want to do in this body area requires self consent. We have heard a lot about boundaries, fortunately, and about also consent. And we tend to think that consent is giving permission to another person, which is important, super important. But even before that, it's important to give permission to ourselves. And we often bypass that. We don't even ask ourselves if we feel in a good moment to tend to our pelvic floor. So self consent has two aspects. First, the rational, and secondly, the sensitive, like emotional, nuanced aspect. So, first, rationally, it has to make sense whatever you want to do with your pelvic floor, meaning like logically, it's safe, it's good for you, you want that rationally. But then, and this is often the missing part, it has to make sense in a sensitive way. So it's almost like if you think of tacos. I mean, I'm Mexican, so if I think about tacos, I immediately start salivating and drooling. And that means yes from my body. It's like, yeah, I have physical self consent about eating some tacos, about working with this aspect of my body that is digestion. But then the rational side of me says like, yeah, but remember the carbs and the fat, and you want to eat like more lean and etc. So maybe it's gonna be lettuce wrapped tacos or something. So always listen to the nuanced sensation of your body. If you feel like, do I want to tend to my pelvic floor in this moment, and you feel like relaxed and open and maybe moving a little bit, like you feel a disposition, like the disposition that a Mexican could have towards tacos, then it's a yes. And if you get an I don't know, then it's a don't do it. It's like hold your horses, pause. And what to do instead? Well, instead of working physically with the sensations of the pelvic floor, instead you can work just rationally by studying the anatomy of the pelvic floor and doing like theoretical explorations of this body part without really getting involved physically until you get the green light from your body, from your flesh. Okay, first thing, self-consent. Secondly, don't squeeze the pelvic floor, don't clench it, don't do Kegels. It's not only aggressive, that approach of tight and close, sucked it in, but it's also often detrimental. Why? Because this set of muscles of the pelvic floor are not meant to do huge efforts of tonus intensity, just like a biceps or quadriceps or the butt muscles. But on the contrary, these muscles of the pelvic floor have a different type of fibers called stabilizers, and they respond to nuanced and gentle cues. So if you go like tighten, clench, do repetitions on command and count on that, you, in the best case, if you're lucky, you will activate compensating bigger muscles, just like the, if you want to tighten the pelvic floor, you're gonna end up tightening the butt or even the jaw and the shoulders and block your breathing. So don't tighten the pelvic floor. It's better to do nothing at all than tightening the pelvic floor. 3, you need to get rid of taboo. And the way you do that is by studying pelvic floor anatomy. Focus on the facts, not on the gossip that people say, cosmopolitans say, your parents may have said, religion may have said around the pelvic. Forget all the words and focus on the anatomical fact. And that's why it's so important to call things by its name. It's not the down there, it's not the lady parts, it's not the hoo-ha, it's the pelvic floor. And if you're talking about the genitals, then it's the vagina, it's the vulva, the labia, it's the clitoris, or it's the cervix. Like be very respectful. Like call things by its name. Thing number 4 is unconditional love. Why? Because it's a vulnerable, intimate area of your body that have gone through a lot of difficulties, especially along history, maybe in your personal history too. And just starting with childbirth, we are lucky to be here, but especially because thousands of years before, our grandmas back in the day didn't have the knowledge nor medicine that we have in our days. So just giving birth to through the pelvic floor was like a risky thing. So we know that at a very like bodily level, that life determining things happening in the pelvic floor, just as getting pregnant can change your life forever, especially if you are like 18 years old. So it's very important to be very gentle and very loving and offer yourself reverence, utmost respect, honoring your pelvic floor, especially if you have had or are going through some struggles. And do know that at least 50% of women have or will have any kind of pelvic floor struggle because of sudden weight gain, childbirth, hormonal change, etc. Simply because our pelvic floor has one extra opening that makes it more challenging to keep everything together. So, this unconditional love is so important to support you through your pelvic floor journey, whatever it may be. It can be like, I just want to embody a deeper and more like ecstatic bliss with my pelvic floor on intimacy. And it's like, okay, so you want more of that, even if that's like the easiest and most positive journey that you may have. It's possible that it takes a while. Sometimes you connect with the pelvic floor right away. Sometimes it takes weeks. Sometimes it takes months. So that's why we need unconditional love. And number 5 is, yeah, to have this infinite patience, just like when you plant a seed and you water it and you don't see much in the beginning, and then you see like the sprout, and then it begins to grow, and then it's a little plant, and then it's a little tree, and then, like, after a while it begins to bloom, and finally delivers the fruits of pleasure. So you need that patience with this intimate area of your body, unlike any other body part. Like, you can get like flat abs in 3 weeks. I am a master pilates teacher trainer, and like, I could bet on you that if you follow the program in 3 weeks, you have a flat ab or a very nice butt, because those are another set of muscles. That is piece of cake. But the pelvic floor requires tending, nurturing, gentleness, awareness. It's a gardening, a self gardening process. So this is a concept at the center of pelvic floor awakening, which the program itself is an invitation for you to bloom from within. We'll tell you more at the end. So about the problems that most people may encounter at any given time with their pelvic floor are urinary incontinence, leaking, or an overactive bladder. And if that's your case, even if you're leaking a little bit every time you sneeze, the first step is shamelessness. Don't care about it. Just remember that your base, that is patience, self-gardening, and be practical about it to remove the taboo. Like, I am leaking, who cares? I'm wearing pads, and if needed, I'm wearing diapers, and if needed, I'm using a strong cologne, and I'm gonna live my life just the same, without isolating, without falling into shame, because all of that is the realm of taboo, and it's very important to put that aside. Just like, don't care emotionally, so you have emotional space to put awareness into becoming a sensitivity detective of your pelvic floor, and thread the nervous system connections you need in this body area to activate it and recover bladder control, which is 100% possible, unless you have like a serious nerve damage and you're on a wheelchair, which still there are many things to work with the pelvic floor. But other than that, it's like patience, discipline, and love, and you'll get through it. Second thing, this is the seventh, is pain. Maybe you experience some kind of pain introducing a Tampax, or doing intercourse, or etc., like vaginismus or vulvodynia, or etc. And again, it's the same. Like, don't care about the thing itself. Culturally, remove the shame and pause the physical activation of the pelvic floor, and instead work only with imagery, only imagining the muscles of the pelvic floor, its fibers, and letting the fibers loosen up. So that would mean to first marinate the rational context and tend to your pelvic floor from from a distance. And even if you work this way, you will find that your pelvic floor responds in a certain way with imagery, with your thoughts, so you can learn more about what tone of what mental tone is more supportive to your pelvic floor. Number 8, anhedonia, which means not feeling pleasure or not feeling much pleasure. Um, the thing is that there are huge expectations about what happens in the pelvic floor, cultural expectations. And even if those can be positive expectations, like mind blowing orgasms or whole body orgasms or being multi orgasmic, or at least to have one orgasms one orgasm in your life, all of that can have the pressure of of the discursive intellectual machinery of taboo. So first off, if you are going through anhedonia, slow it all down. Like reduce the expectations, and instead of looking for, expecting and demanding for fireworks from yourself, look respectfully and with curiosity for nuanced delights. And it's almost like if you are used to your Starbucks frothy frappuccino with extra mint and coconut and extra chips and etc., and then you take a sip of jasmine tea, it's not going to taste at all. It's like warm water. So this huge expectation of sensations of and getting used to that pressure, like, oh, this is gonna taste like a super loaded frappuccino, and the truth is that it's something like translucid and refined and languorous and almost like like the sensation of the wind caressing your cheeks, like you may miss the point of how pleasure is experienced in this body part if you are too much focused on what culture says that the pelvic floor experience should be. So I invite you to slow it down and get curious, remove shame, and just notice what's there and notice how is that for you, and have develop your own criteria for delight. And number 9, numbness. Okay, if you feel 0 there, chances are that um, it's a lack of awareness rather than a lack of sensitivity, unless you have had, like, unfortunately, a nerve problem. So if you don't feel anything, which is very common after childbirth, and fatigue and all the chaos makes it even more challenging, the invitation is to look for the minimal, noticeable sensation. Like imagine you peel a grape and then you place the skin of the grape in the palm of your hand and you try to notice that nuanced sensation. It's almost like a whisper. And again, you're not gonna listen a whisper at a rock concert. So when it comes to the pelvic floor, do look for the nuanced sensations whispering you delight. So of course, you need a supportive, calm environment, which is what I'm gonna talk about next, which is number 10. It's about doing less so your nervous system goes from survival mode to rest and digest mode. Remember that I told you that the pelvic floor muscles have a very different anatomy than most of the exterior muscles. So the exterior muscles are like rah, like the beast in me. They are used for explosive potency. And the pelvic floor is used for support because as we have seen, it has to support as a literal floor the weight of your organs 24/7. So when you move slower, when you do smaller movements, and when you move in a softer way, you invite a shift to the other side of the moon, to the other side of your nervous system, which is not survival, but rather it's about rest and digest. It's the parasympathetic nervous system. And then you will be more open to the whispers, to the nuanced sensations of the pelvic floor, to the savor of a delicatessen, exquisite jasmine tea. Such is the quality of the sensations of the pelvic floor. So, step number 11 is what to do if you have, like, okay, you are good with with the approach and everything and curious about the pelvic floor, but you have absolutely no idea about what it is or where to start. So the first step is anatomy, because it's our way to tap into the fact, like, okay, this is what we're gonna focus on. We're doing nothing physical yet. We are not trying to activate this set of muscles. We are just like preparing the ground to plant the seed, preparing the mental ground to plant the seed of awareness of our pelvic floor. So grab a book, Google and Wikipedia. There are very nice images of the pelvic floor, and start there if you have no idea about this body area. And once you have a little bit more idea, the 12th thing to do is to understand that the pelvic floor doesn't work in isolation. The pelvic floor is not a lonely hunter. It, it works in a pack, meaning the pelvic floor is part of a body system that is called the core system. And you can imagine the core as a container. It has a cylinder shape that contains your organs. An analogy would be to imagine a can of Campbell's soup. So you have your can of Campbell's soup, and it has a base, it has a lid, and it has the surrounding things. And it's filled with soup, your favorite flavor, of course. Mine is mushrooms. So the core system is a container of muscles that you have in your abdomen, in your torso. And inside of these containers, instead of soup, you have all your digestive organs, the stomach, the, the bladder, the intestines, the uterus, the urethra, the bladder, everything is inside the Campbell soup, inside the core system. So the top of the can or the core is the diaphragm, is the muscle, the primary muscle of respiration. And the base of the can, what is the, you tell me, what is the base of the core system in our body? What? Can you say it louder? Of course, it's the pelvic floor, hence its name, floor, pelvic floor, the floor of the pelvis. And all around, you have the transversus abdominis, the deepest layer of your abdominal muscles that shrinks your waist and flattens your belly, by the way, the multifidi and the psoas. So, when you understand that the pelvic floor is part of a system, you may start to grasp the importance of working it as part of a whole. Like if you work the pelvic floor, you are implicitly working with the diaphragm, the muscle of breathing, and the abdominals. And if you attempt to work the pelvic floor in isolation, you're gonna create a distortion in that system that will affect directly your respiration and your digestion. And perhaps this makes it easier to understand why pelvic floor problems include constipation, because the abdominals are not properly supporting bowel movements, for example, or even worse, shallow breathing patterns. So trying to work the pelvic floor in isolation, such as those horrible and misinforming Kegels, creates the effect of a Campbell soup that have had a blow. Have you seen how a can gets distorted in its shape? It may not break, but it doesn't have its shape, and it doesn't have the, like, they have to remove it from the store. So don't remove yourself from the store of delights and health. Instead, understand that you need to always, always, always work with the totality of the core system if you shall wish to properly work with your pelvic floor for health, for delight, for whatever you please. It's the whole enchilada. It's all or nothing. It's you either work the pelvic floor within the core system, or you don't work the pelvic floor at all, because working it in isolation is risky and it can break havoc in the whole core system. So, step number 13, we are interested in working the pelvic floor as a whole, as part of the core. So where to start? Well, remember that the lid of our Campbell soup can, of our core container system, was the diaphragm, the primary muscle of respiration. So, well, if the diaphragm is the primary muscle of respiration, then what does the diaphragm do? I want to hear you say the answer. Of course, breathing. The diaphragm is what you are using right now to breathe, and what you have been using for the past 30 minutes to breathe all the while. And even if you may not be aware, if you used your diaphragm on autopilot, you have been also using your pelvic floor on autopilot. Yeah, all this time since we started with this. And isn't it wonderful? And that's how important is the pelvic floor. Yeah, we want it for bladder control, for proper bowel movements, even more for intimacy and delight and ecstasies and all of that. But like, hey, we wanted it especially happy because we need the pelvic floor every time we breathe. And even more because we breathe 22,000 times a day. And the good news is that if you improve a little bit your pelvic floor, you will improve your breathing pattern. And as it is something that you repeat so much, just a little improvement in your pelvic floor will radically transform the way you breathe and therefore your quality of life. So, just a little exercise is the only one that I'm gonna share here because this is getting a little bit long, is to just focus on what's your pelvic floor doing naturally by the end of your exhale. And I repeat, do not tense the pelvic floor, don't clench it, don't try to do anything. The pelvic floor does it by default. And if you can recall, the pelvic floor is better sensed when we are looking for nuance. So continue breathing, don't even count it, don't do anything, just notice the very end of your exhale, and perhaps you can notice a little sensation between your legs in the crotch of these muscles gently withdrawing into your body. And it's really a minute, super tiny movement. Literally, the range that the pelvic floor uh, creates when it contracts, it's about a couple millimeters. So we are looking for something as gentle as closing your eyes. Try closing and opening your eyes very gently for a couple times to connect with the softness of the pelvic floor. And perhaps you're getting a hint, almost like a whisper of sensation. That's that's marvelous. That's great. That's what we want. And we don't want anything more than that. That's the starting point. Just tending to the very end of the exhale to see if we can listen to the natural movement, to the natural sensation of the pelvic floor. Okay, step number 14 is to use imagery. So, when we work with imagery, we give a more detailed action plan action plan to our nervous system to organize neurologically and support the activation of these muscles. So a beautiful image for me is to imagine the pelvic floor as a flower. Perhaps you have seen how the flowers open during the day and they close at dusk. They go to sleep, they wake up the next day. So imagine with that immense softness, your pelvic floor opening when you inhale, relaxing, letting go, like almost as if your pelvic floor was yawning, like, yeah, I am a super sumptuous, perfumed flower, releasing my fragrance, perfuming all the world on the inhale, and on the exhale, like, I am drawing into myself with my petals. You can imagine your labia minora of your vulva as petals like coming together, like if you were hugging yourself with the pelvic floor, falling towards your own center of power. So that's an image, a metaphorical image that works with a principle that is called mental simulation of movement. has been proved as being very efficient for training uh, Olympic gymnasts. And there has been even like MRI studies. And what's interesting is that imagery lights up the same areas of the brain that naturally light up when you're doing the action itself. So it's like rehearsing what's gonna happen. And imagery is like mentioned earlier, a great first step if you're experiencing pain or discomfort and you want to work with your pelvic floor, not in a direct way until you get like the green lights from yourself, the self consent. Working with imagery, with metaphorical imagery, as we have just tried, or anatomical imagery are the go-to solutions. And finally, 15, tend to the pelvic floor sensually. Instead of forcing the pelvic floor, trying to get a Kegel worth contraction, put that aside and focus on the self gardening of delight with this like utter reverence, profound self respect, infinite patience, and unconditional love to yourself, to your most intimate body aspect, which is you. You are your body, your pelvic floor is you. And have this context of letting pleasure guide you and only go as far as it's pleasurable. Always letting your body have the last word. And really use pleasure as your north star. Really go slow, go gentle, and almost anticipate if what you're doing is leading you to pain and walk away from that. And instead, let pleasure guide you. My invitation here is that you trust pleasure, trust what feels good for you in every aspect of yourself, as yeah as a practice of self ownership, of self authorizing yourself to delight in the fullest splendor of your sensitivity. And if you're ready to bloom from within in this spring, I invite you to join Pelvic Floor Awakening. That is my 4-week online course. It's a self-paced course with 4 modules. And during the live segment of the program, there's a live Q&A with me every week. You have lifetime access, 100% money back guarantee. So you have nothing to lose, everything to win. In the page that I'm gonna link in the description of this episode of the Sensual Sessions, you can read a bunch of testimonials of success stories and endorsements from colleagues that are orthopedians and medical professionals. And yeah, if this is for you the moment, if this is for you the spring to increase intimate sensitivity, to overcome leaking, and to bloom from within, I invite you to join us at my website, which is my name, www.candiaraquel.com/pelvic floor awakening, which is www.candiaraquel.com/pelvic floor awakening. Candia Raquel and pelvic floor awakening. And I'll see you there to bloom from within this very spring. And as always, do remember to take the time to sense your fire so you can share the flame.